My taxi driver friend told me about this passenger who demanded the driver take him somewhere he couldn't remember the name or address of. The guy knew it had a red building next to it somewhere in the city. When asked to provide more details, he got frustrated and blamed the driver for not having psychic abilities to locate unnamed destinations. A coworker of my brother shared details about a bus passenger who complained the route was too long because she wanted to go home, but apparently took the longest bus line in the city. Instead of getting off and taking a different route, she demanded the bus change its entire route just for her destination. She seemed to think bus schedules should be customized per passenger. One of my dentist's patients mentioned encountering a flight passenger who brought a full-size suitcase as a carry-on and got offended when told it wouldn't fit in the overhead bin. She'd packed for a month-long trip in a cabin that required small bags. Instead of checking the suitcase, she demanded the aircraft be redesigned with larger compartments to accommodate her overpacking. My neighbor's sister works as a train conductor and told me about a passenger who insisted the train was going too fast and demanded they slow down significantly. The train was operating at standard speed completely within regulations. He seemed to think trains should crawl along at whatever pace made him comfortable regardless of schedules or other passengers. A friend of my son's coach mentioned a bus passenger who complained about the windows being too transparent and allowing too much sunlight. He'd sit by a window on a bright day and instead of moving, demanded the bus install blackout curtains for everyone. When told he could sit in a different spot, he complained about being inconvenienced by having choice. My uncle's barber shared this story about an airplane passenger who brought a bicycle on board as a personal item. When told bicycles required special handling and fees, he got absolutely livid that the airline wouldn't just let him strap it to his seat. He demanded to know why his bicycle was more important than safety regulations. One of my accountant's clients told me about a taxi passenger who directed the driver through an intentionally long route because she thought the shorter route looked less interesting on maps. The trip cost twice as much because she wanted scenic viewing through windows. When given the final bill, she complained about expensive taxi fares without acknowledging her own route choices. My friend's yoga instructor mentioned a train passenger who demanded a refund because the landscape outside his window wasn't beautiful enough. He'd taken a route through industrial areas and expected scenic mountain views instead. When told the train went where it went, he complained about false advertising of natural beauty that wasn't guaranteed anywhere. A person I met at my daughter's school told me about a bus passenger who tried to pay for his ticket with a personal check written for a different amount than the fare. He'd written it for half the required price and seemed to think bus drivers would accept partial payment through checks. When told exact change was required, he accused the system of discrimination against check users. My mechanic's assistant shared details about a rideshare passenger who got in the car, eating extremely pungent durian fruit, and complained the driver didn't open windows fast enough. She'd brought the notoriously smelly fruit into a confined space and expected the driver to deal with the overwhelming odor without complaint. When the driver suggested she eat less smelly foods in cars, she claimed he was culturally insensitive. One of my former teachers mentioned a flight attendant who dealt with a passenger demanding special meals during a 2-hour flight. He wanted gourmet cuisine prepared specifically for him on a short regional flight that had basic snack service. When told the plane offered standard refreshments, he complained about airline quality having decreased. My sister's coworker works in aviation and told me about a passenger who refused to turn off his phone during flight and argued that airplane mode was a government conspiracy to track him. When the flight attendant insisted on regulations, he claimed she was part of the surveillance scheme. He remained combative for the entire flight about a basic safety requirement. A friend from my neighborhood mentioned a bus passenger who demanded the driver stop at a location that wasn't an official bus stop because it was more convenient for him. He expected the bus to deviate from its route just for his pickup point. When told the bus couldn't stop arbitrarily, he complained about the bus system being inflexible. My gym trainer's friend shared this story about a train passenger who brought a live chicken onto the train in her purse because she considered it an emotional support animal. The chicken was loose in her bag next to other passengers. When asked to contain the bird, she became offended and claimed everyone was being mean to her and her poultry companion. One of my wife's relatives told me about a taxi passenger who complained the route took too long and blamed the driver for traffic jams. The driver couldn't control other vehicles or weather conditions causing delays. The passenger seemed to think taxi drivers could command traffic to move faster through sheer willpower. My barber's longtime customer mentioned a flight passenger who tried boarding with a massive dog he claimed was his emotional support animal but clearly wasn't trained for public spaces. The dog jumped on people, barked constantly, and was absolutely not service-trained. When questioned about certification, he insisted having a dog meant it was automatically an emotional support animal. A colleague of my father shared details about a bus passenger who complained she was seated next to a man and demanded he be moved because his presence made her uncomfortable. There were no empty seats on the bus, and she seemed to think public transportation should accommodate irrational seating preferences based on gender alone. One of my book club friends mentioned a train passenger who insisted the temperature was too warm and demanded every window be opened despite the train traveling at high speed. When other passengers complained about wind and noise, he became indignant that people didn't understand his temperature needs were more important than their comfort. My doctor mentioned during an appointment that a patient who worked as a flight attendant had dealt with a passenger who removed his shoes and socks and put his bare feet on the armrest next to another passenger. When asked to behave appropriately, he claimed he had a medical condition requiring constant foot exposure in public spaces. A friend of my brother's told me about a taxi passenger who insisted the driver was taking him the wrong direction even though they were heading exactly where the passenger had requested. He didn't actually know which direction his destination was located and became defensive about his geographical confusion. My neighbor across the street shared this story about a bus passenger who demanded a refund because the route took longer than she expected despite knowing the bus schedule beforehand. She'd chosen a bus with multiple stops expecting express service somehow. When told the schedule was publicly available, she complained about buses not being efficient enough. One of my accountant's employees mentioned a flight passenger who brought a gas station hot dog onto the plane and complained because other passengers complained about the smell. He seemed to think airplane cabin air should accommodate his food odor without affecting anyone else. When told he could eat more discreetly, he claimed food shamming was discrimination. My yoga instructor's sister shared details about a train passenger who played loud music through his phone speaker for an entire journey despite multiple people asking him to use headphones. When a conductor addressed him, he claimed his music preferences took precedence over shared space etiquette. He seemed genuinely confused about why other people's comfort mattered. A person I know from my son's soccer team mentioned a rideshare passenger who insisted the driver wasn't taking the fastest route and kept redirecting him through directions from his outdated GPS. The driver knew the area but couldn't convince the passenger that his phone's old information was inaccurate. The passenger complained about the final fare without acknowledging his own route interference. My hairdresser's regular customer told me about a bus passenger who complained about the bus being too full and demanded it make fewer stops to consolidate passengers. She seemed to think buses should skip scheduled stops so fewer people would board. When explained everyone had equal right to board, she complained about public transportation being too public. One of my cousin's workmates shared this story about a flight passenger who demanded to be seated in a different row because he didn't like the person sitting next to him for reasons he wouldn't articulate. The flight was completely booked and no alternative seats existed. He wanted special accommodation based on unfounded personal preferences about strangers. My partner's friend, who works as a train operator, mentioned a passenger who complained the train stopped too frequently at stations. He wanted express service, but had boarded a local train that stopped at every station. Instead of taking a different train, he demanded his particular train be rerouted to skip stops for his benefit. A friend of my parents mentioned a taxi passenger who directed the driver through an intentionally complicated route because she enjoyed the ride and wanted it to last longer. When the bill came, she complained about the expensive fare without understanding her own choices had caused the extended trip. She wanted a long, leisurely ride at short trip prices. One of my former colleagues shared details about a flight attendant who dealt with a passenger demanding ice water at 30,000 feet who insisted it was a human right. When told there were beverage limits due to aircraft weight restrictions, he became furious that basic human rights weren't accommodated on commercial flights. My neighbor's son told me about a bus passenger who fell asleep and missed his stop completely, then demanded the bus driver turn around and go back. The bus was already several stops past his destination, and he expected the entire route to be reorganized around his nap. When told he should have used an alarm, he blamed the driver for not waking him up personally. A friend from my gym mentioned a train passenger who brought a loud wind instrument and practiced during the journey because he had an upcoming audition. He played the same passage repeatedly for 2 hours and seemed genuinely shocked that other passengers complained about the noise. When told to practice elsewhere, he claimed artistic expression took priority over shared space courtesy. One of my dentist's assistants shared this story about a flight passenger who complained the plane was too airplane-like because it had airplane smells, sounds, and aircraft-related features. He seemed to expect planes to operate more like hotels with comfortable silence and pleasant scents. When told this was how planes functioned, he demanded refunds for the plane experience being too plainish. My sister's friend works in transportation and mentioned a taxi passenger who insisted on paying half price because he claimed he'd only used half the car. He was one person in a single seat but somehow believed he should only pay for partial vehicle usage. When charged the full fare, he complained about unfair pricing logic that made no sense. A colleague of my mother told me about a bus passenger who complained the bus was moving too much as it drove. Every time the bus accelerated, braked, or turned, she got upset about the motion. When told buses move while operating, she seemed genuinely offended that the bus didn't stay completely still while traveling to a destination.